company I worked for didn't teach us to build a personal brand. For me, it's something that I developed because selling was really hard.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman podcast, and welcome to today's show. On today's show, we have Julie Broad, and we're diving into one of my favorite topics, one of the topics that if you invest into it now, in 10 years, you're going to be absolutely crushing it in sales, and that is personal branding. Julie shares, importantly, how your personal brand makes sales easier, and I don't say that lightheartedly. Sales as a whole makes prospecting easier, it makes closing easier, it makes the whole thing easier, and clearly you can tell that I've got a bee in my bonnet that salespeople should be building their personal brand right now. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. You can find out more about Julie and you can get her book, The New Brand You, on Amazon. And with that all said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, Julie, and welcome to the Salesman podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are more than welcome. I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited to dive into personal branding and everything else that kind of like spearheads out from this, because there's so much benefit to the audience. And as I kind of touched on with yourself before we click record, there's not much imperative in the sales industry for whatever reason for them to encourage people to improve their personal brand, both online and, in person. So I think there's a lot to go out in this episode, and I think there's going to be a lot of value to the audience. So I'm going to start it with a massively open-ended question in very purposefully, because I want to get your thoughts on this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, and this will lead us into the rest of the conversation. But why is having a strong personal brand, why is it so important in business?
Ooh, that is a big open-ended question. It's funny because for me, I never thought about it when I initially got into sales. I certainly didn't think about it, and the company I worked for didn't teach us to build a personal brand. For me, it's something that I developed because selling was really hard. I found it very difficult to attract people into the business and to close the deals. But I needed to find a solution to this, both when I worked in the sales role and then when I became an entrepreneur, I had to find a way to solve the problem. And so for me, building a brand so that people came to me and the sale was almost already closed by the time they came to me, it sped up the process and it made it so much more comfortable for me. So I realized that as people got to know that I was the person to go to for this solution, it got easier and easier. So then I started to go, okay, I'm going to consciously do things to develop my personal brand. And I think maybe part of the problem is a lot of people think branding is websites and logos and mission statements and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So they don't necessarily think about it as I need a personal brand because their company, the company they work for, or their own company has a brand. But that's not the only brand that's important. A lot of people think about it as real estate. In real estate, if you're going to sell your house, you're not going to say, oh, go work with Remax, which is a real estate company. You're going to say, go work with, Jane Doe, who is a person who works for Remax. And I think that's something that gets overlooked when you're a salesperson in a lot of cases.
Is that getting overlooked by the individual salesperson, that they think they're selling the company's product and the buyer is thinking that they're buying from the individual? Is that something that the salesperson is not being conscious to?
I don't know the answer generically, but I know for a lot of industries, it's the company. Like I got sent to a lot of sales training, and at no point are you ever taught to build your own brand as a person, because all they talk about is the brands of the products you're selling and the company's brand. And so I just think it's something in a lot of industries that gets overlooked at the training level. And a lot of salespeople probably realize that they're the person people are getting, they're getting the referrals to them personally, but maybe they're not sure how to do what they need to do to get more referrals to their name.
So I want to come on to the practical steps of this, including your book and everything included within it later on in the show. But I really want to drill into the audience head and into mine as well, because I need to work on this and develop it further. That personal brand makes sales easier. I'm paraphrasing what you said earlier on, but that's literally what I found. So I still sell the advertising space on the podcast. When I first started the show, it was very difficult. No one knew who I was. I was proactively outreaching. I was having to sell. There wasn't that level of trust there. Whereas now people come to me and it's oversubscribed essentially. So clearly that's the best place to be in sales, where you're turning customers away as opposed to having to you're not feeling pressure to have to close the deals, and it comes with prospecting well, having a big pipeline, and all that as well. But when in your journey, in your story, Julie, when did you realize the personal branding element of all this? When did you realize that having customers come to you can happen when you are, I guess, a trusted resource within the industry?
I had a kind of a long evolution through sales, but probably the big where it really stood out for me was in around 2008, 2009. My husband and I quit my job and started to focus on real estate investing. And we were raising money because at that time, we didn't qualify for financing. We didn't have the money to do the deals on our own anymore. And so we were, trying to get people to invest with us to continue to grow our portfolio. So you're looking to people for, $80,000 to $150,000. And it's a tricky position to be in when you have to kind of not only convince somebody that they want to invest their money in real estate at a time when the markets were terrible, but also that they're going to trust you with the money. And it was at that time where I started to realize that people that were coming to us because they had heard, they'd seen me speak. I started to do some speaking at that time, and I was writing a lot of articles. And they came to us saying, hey, I hear you are an investor, and, I'm wondering what I should do with my money. And all of a sudden, a whole bunch of the work was gone. And I thought, you know what? These are the people that are coming to me, and they're practically closing the deal for me. I'm not actually trying to convince them at any point that they should give me their money. I'm trying to figure out if they're a good fit for the kind of investing we do. And so that was really around 2010, but it was around our real estate investing that I started to realize that the stronger our name was, and the stronger the name recognition and the trust that people had in it, the easier everything was going to be.
Definitely. And what struck me from what you just said then, so you're kind of pulling from you're using the word investor very literally, but the audience, so B2B sales professionals, the companies that you're selling to are investing into your product or service, and are investing into you as well. And what gets me excited about personal branding, Julie, is that for better or worse, most salespeople don't have much leverage over the product that they're selling. But what they do have leverage over in a massive way versus both the competition internally, externally, and the other stakeholders that are involved in the selling process, they have leverage over themselves, don't they? And what I want to ask you next is your personal brand, and and we don't need to talk about kind of facts and figures and research or anything like that, but is your personal brand from your own experience the biggest leverage point that you have to make closing deals easier?
Yeah, absolutely. And think about it from another perspective. Think about the companies that you work with and the people you work with. Once you trust somebody, once you have a relationship with them, or somebody trusts them and has a relationship with them, you don't even shop around, right? It doesn't even matter what other products and services another company is offering. If you've got a person that you trust, that can help you with the problem that you have, or whatever it is, fill the need, you'll go work with that person. And that's personal brand, right? That piece right there, that, knowing somebody, trusting them, or somebody else telling you that they know them and trust them. That piece fills the gap for you. So it's huge.
Definitely. And to go again one step further, something I've discovered with doing the podcast is that, and this is relevant for some sales professions and some positions, and not relevant for others. If you have to close 1 or 2 clients a year, it probably isn't that useful. If you have to close many, then it might be. In that I, with the podcast, have personal brand and trust with the audience at scale. So this still weirds me out, and very, very rarely I get recognized in the street or airports and that kind of thing, which is awesome, and we have a conversation, but it still freaks me out when someone comes over and says, hey, Will from the Sales Podcast, and I have no idea who that person is, and they know all about me. They know that my kind of dream cars are GTR, because we talk about that on the show. They know where I live, even, because I mentioned Leeds kind of in the UK regularly as well. But even more so, it happens over email all the time. Almost every email I get is a really warm intro, less an introduction, but a warm kind of conversation with people. And for me to reach out to them and try and convince them to download the show, or refer it to someone else, or share the show with their sales team, that is a big uphill battle versus when someone emails me because they've, hopefully have added value, and guests like yourself, Julie, come on the show and add value to the audience, so they get something out of it. You don't get nothing for free in it, but the introductions and the conversations that I have that are warm when people know me, that still freaks me out a little bit because, again, I don't know the 100 people that email me every day, and they know me relatively intimately at this point if they've been listening for a while.
So you've done a great job. That's a great example of personal branding being very strong.
Yeah, and a great job by massive fluke, as opposed to any structure behind all this, which is what I move on to now, Julie. So most of the salespeople listening now, they'll be driving to the office or they'll be driving to that next big sales meeting. Clearly, personal branding is a longer term game versus a hack that they can put in practice to kind of some weird closing technique or something like that they can put in practice right away. But is there a step-by-step process? Is there a way and a methodology to build a personal brand that goes across industries? Or is it what I've experienced, which is what I've done, which is kind of just experimentation constantly?
There's something to be said for experimentation, but it's not an efficient way to get there.
No, I will attest to that for sure.
But it does help you kind of realize what works and what doesn't to connect with the people that you most want to connect with. I think there's kind of two parts to this. One is figuring out what you want your personal brand to be. And in my book, The New Brand You, I kind of take you through a brand magic formula is what I call it. But essentially, I'm just talking about, what's your message? The M is for message. And that's just, knowing how you help people and getting clear and concise on that. So for a lot of the salespeople, you'll know this as an elevator pitch. For me, an elevator pitch was never comfortable. I always kind of focused on asking questions and telling stories was kind of my approach to it. But that's, kind of getting familiar with what you want your brand to be and then figuring out how you're going to communicate your brand out there. So, once you know your message, you want to think about the mediums. So podcasting is one, articles is another, speaking, even your networking events that you're attending. It's just being a little bit strategic with putting it out there. The A is for appearance. And let
me stop you here. I don't want to. Yeah. There's so much to go at here, and I don't want to just gloss over it. So, the message. Clearly, this is super important, and clearly, everything tiers on and piles on top of this. Should a B2B sales professional's message, should it be, I sell X product for X company and I do a good job at it? Or should there be a personal element to the message, and should the personal story be entwined within it?
Yeah, I think so. And again, you got to do what's comfortable for you. So I'm never somebody who says this is how you have to do it, because I think for everyone, there's a place that is comfortable and natural and something that is closer in alignment to who you are. And I think that's critical. It has to be, you can't pretend to be somebody you're not. And especially in sales, the more authentic and real you are, the more people will trust you, because even if they don't know, they sense it, right? It's one of those things where they can sense that you're being real and true. So I think that whatever's real and authentic for you is the best place to go. For me, I've always been uncomfortable with putting emphasis on me. So my focus has always been on understanding other people's situation and then telling a story, and probably a personal story, so that you can relate to, the problem or the solution that I offer, and you relate to it through a story. So that's been my approach, and that's how I'm comfortable. Like I said, the elevator pitch has never been something, where I say I sell X and, I help you do this. That's just never been for me. But some people are great at it, and it suits some people. So I think it's a matter of figuring out what works for you.
Let me ask you on this then, because clearly the stereotype of the salesperson is this man or woman throwing pitches down people's throats, kind of being a little bit wishy-washy at best and just lying to people at worst. And clearly this is the used car salesperson versus the kind of like suited and booted enterprise B2B sales professional. And people go back and forth between the two, and hopefully our audience are totally on board with being congruent and being a professional in the industry. But I just want to, again, I don't want to gloss over this because I think it's important to just emphasize it. What happens when you're not congruent? What happens when you have a message that is slightly bullshitty, which is you're trying to twist a scenario or you're making something up? What happens in that scenario?
You might get a sale, but you won't build a relationship and you won't get referrals down the road. So to me, it's a very short-term approach. And there's definitely people out there. I mean, I've spent years in the real estate industry and the real estate education and training industry in North America. And there's a lot of people who can get a lot of sales up front, but they're not getting any business in the future. They have to get fresh people all the time, and nobody's ever referring them because it's revealed that it was crap. Plus, how are you sleeping at night? Like for me, I want to be able to sleep really peacefully at night. And if I'm not in alignment with the message and what I'm selling, then it just doesn't work for me. So it's, I don't think it's a good long-term strategy, but I also don't think it's good for your health. So
I love it. And again, just to go over that without glossing over, because there's so much, it seems so simple. It seems so common sense, but yet I see people doing it all the time. And similar to yourself, in the sales training industry, there's a lot of charlatans and there's a lot of people who will sell you on one course or book. But a lot of them haven't sold anything in 20 years. And so everything that they're doing is skewed. And what I wanted to touch on with that was, if you are constantly ripping people off at worst, and again, best, you're kind of not being upfront with the truth and people aren't having the best experience, if that's the worst, if that's the best of the worst case scenarios. It used to be that you just perhaps move to a different city and carry on going, especially in like real estate or something along those lines. Now with the internet, it's getting harder and harder to get away with that, isn't it?
it is, and thank goodness. I think it's fantastic for the consumer because you can Google people and learn a whole bunch about them. But again, this is why it's even more important today to build your brand than ever before, because people can Google you and will find out a lot of things about you. So you want to be taking control of that brand and making sure that you have some say in what people are saying about you.
Definitely. I read a research paper. I might butcher the quote slightly, but it was something along the lines of 80% of professional buyers, when they're dealing with B2B salespeople, will Google and research the individual salespeople and the sales team behind the deal before they will pick up the phone or reply to an email. So clearly, it's more important than ever. It's only ever going to become more and more important as well. So I massively interrupted you there, Julie, and you were just about to start telling us, I think, how we can, or the platforms we can communicate our message on to build that brand.
I kind of touched on those already. We're already on one, right? Podcasting, speaking for me has been phenomenal, and writing articles, publishing a book. I think one of the most brilliant things you can do is publish a professional book. I say professional because it's really easy to publish garbage. It's easier than ever before to be a self-published author, but it's also too easy in a lot of cases. I've bought a lot of books where I would be embarrassed if that was my book. But a good book positions you as an expert, and it also, if you ever want to find a new job, what a great thing to have on your resume, that you've written a book, that you've done these other things. So, personal branding will help you attract sales today, but it will also attract opportunities for you in the future. So things like books and podcasts and videos and all that kind of stuff is hugely beneficial. But I was taking you through the magic formula, and we already touched on the G, which is Google. Paying attention to it. So we did the M, which was your message and kind of the mediums that you're going to communicate your message. A is appearance. And the only thing I'll say about that is that, I never tell somebody you have to wear a suit. Again, it's about something that's in alignment with you and being aware that certain things will distract from your message. If you show up totally inappropriate, you'll stand out, but you'll also be distracting. But I think that, again, and I mentioned this, is the happier you are, the more in alignment you are, the more your appearance will be strong and memorable. Because I'm one of those people who believes that a lot of your appearance comes from the inside. So taking care of yourself, health, being healthy and doing things that are a good fit for you makes a big difference on that. And G, which we touched on, is the Google results. And I think this is really, really important. If you haven't typed your name into Google to see what comes up, now is a really good time to do that and start paying attention to it. And simple things that people can do if your name isn't coming up, or it's not showing, it's only showing your hockey league result or something like that. You want it to be showing what you do as a professional, at least a few of those links. Being on LinkedIn, Google Plus, YouTube videos, doing those things. You don't have to necessarily have your own website. I like to have my own website because that's real estate that you control. These other sites, you're just kind of a tenant that doesn't pay rent, so they can shut them down or do whatever they want with them in the future. But it's really fast and easy to get positioning for your name if you go on some of those social media sites and just create a professional page so that there's something showing up and has contact information so people can find you.
Definitely. And just to emphasize that as well, Google is obviously smart. If someone's searching in the UK for your name and you're based in the UK, you're more likely to going to come up. If they're searching from a specific industry. I don't know, Google might even go as far as if someone's working from a specific business and a company and that ties in with the industry, they're going to bump up different results to names and companies that tie in with all of that as well, which is super important because I think a lot of the audience, and I've had this question posed to me, is, well, I don't want to create a podcast. I don't want to have to do daily articles, or I don't want to do daily YouTube videos or, weekly, even monthly. But it works just as well at this point in this age of the internet to, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think I'm right, into just having a little bit of content, linking it all together to a hub, whether that be your own page or even going to your LinkedIn page, just to give Google context of who you are and what you do. That for your name is all you need in most situations, isn't it?
Yeah, precisely. And I think for most sales professionals, I think LinkedIn is phenomenal. And it almost always shows up in the first couple results when somebody types in your name. So just creating a great LinkedIn profile and posting the odd bit of content to your LinkedIn profile, that's better than doing nothing right now. That's a big first step.
So let me ask you this. So you may have thoughts one way or another. I'll tell you my thoughts on this as well so I don't color your kind of opinions. I'll tell you them after the fact. But should all this content, should it be professional, suited, booted, professional images, or not super casual, or should it blur that line and be slightly more relaxed? And should you have a bit more of your personality coming through? If you love dogs, should there be a dog in your picture? You know what I mean? Even though clearly you're not going to have pictures of you partying, in Ibiza, like clubbing at 3:00 in the morning, and there's someone being sick in the background. But is it okay? Is it okay to like blur that line and have that bit more personality in your profiles? And should we be actively doing this?
It depends on you. But so we didn't finish the magic formula. So that actually leads nicely into the C, which is character. And that's bringing in your personality. And I, just so people know, is I'm an expert in. So most people will have expertise in whatever they're selling, but it's really, really important. It's something I emphasize a lot with entrepreneurs because they can be kind of all scattered. But C is character. And you have to bring your personality in because at the end of the day, we're not relating necessarily on a business level. We're relating on the fact that, maybe we both do have dogs, or maybe we both do like to party in Greece. How you present it is going to be, slightly different. So I think there's no cut and dried answer. It depends on your industry. It depends on who you are. But I do think you want to bring in your personality and you do want to bring in your character, and the things that are important to you in your life are those connection points where you'll build a relationship. And again, that's important because that's where you're going to get the referrals. That's where trust gets built. And ultimately, that's also where the fun happens. The best conversations you have usually aren't just work related. You're talking about some of that personal stuff. And so if you're not sharing that, then people aren't going to be able to relate to you as quickly and easily. So there is a point where I think you should share that. But how you do it, again, that's up to you. I'm typically not going to have a bunch of things in my profile pictures. I'm just going to have my face because I want you to know who I am and start to build a relationship with me. But yeah, through conversations, you'll find out a lot about me. Through some of the posts that I make out there, you'll find out, where I live, what's important to me. And that stuff is really, I think, key.
Definitely. And I think I'd go one step further, especially on LinkedIn when it's super corporate and it's all a little bit weird. I think when you put that persona across, you don't seem like a real person. You seem like that's the person that you're dealing with at that moment of time in the office, in the boiler room. And I think sales is beyond that. I think the internet has shattered that illusion. And I also like the idea that if you put a couple of things that you're interested in, for example, for me, it's like mountain biking and I'm into rotary engine cars and things of that nature, I give people the ammunition to come at me to start conversations with these foundational kind of elements of building rapport. So I'll have people say 2 or 3 emails a day from people who race cars, or salespeople that do it as a hobby, or they're into rotary engine cars, or they're into the Nissans and that I like, and they will use that, and I put it to them on a silver platter. I give it to them. It's a gift to reach out to me to talk about any of these things. And if anyone ever wants to try and sell me anything, just open with an email about cars, and you'll probably 99% of the time you're going to get a reply of some sorts, and then you can start like nurturing the conversation. So that aside, before I get loads of spam emails now from people trying to talk about cars, that I think giving other people the opportunity to see that a little bit into your world so that they can start conversations with you, I think there's real value in that as well. And I want to tie all this together. So we've been through a bit of the process there, we've been through it can make sales easier. Does it make it easier to influence people when you have a strong personal brand? And if so, why?
Absolutely, because all the elements of trust and influence come into play. So, you probably heard, people want to do business with people they know, like, and trust. And like you've indicated, and it's happened to me too, I was thinking about a funny story. I live on an island in Canada. And so there's a ferry that we take to get to the mainland. And I've been on the ferry and people have come up to me and started asking me about my dog and saying, oh, how's CrossFit going? These personal
Mm-hmm.
things that I share. And I'm looking at them thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know their name. Like, I can't believe I've forgotten their name. And then through the conversation, you realize that it's, you have never met them, but they just feel like they know you. And that all comes from that feeling of know, like, and trust. And so that is really, really a critical piece. And so all those elements come into play with your brand. People feel like they know you. They feel like they've known you their whole life. And you've got that affinity. Affinity is really important, that shared background or something that is shared. So a lot of those big elements, and even celebrity to a degree. Celebrity is one of those things that people are heavily influenced by it, but and it gets created through personal branding because you become this bit of a celebrity. People are listening to you all the time, hearing your voice in their headphones or in their car. And so that builds a bit of a celebrity, which again is very influential. I mean, there's reason why a lot of celebrities make $1 million to just, be shown driving the car down the road, right? It's because for some weird reason, we trust that celebrity. We trust people that we see more on a regular basis. So if I'm dropping my kids off to school, I'm going to trust the other parents that I see every day, then they drop their kids off more than a stranger for no other reason than that person is familiar. And so all these elements come into play with personal brand. And so it's incredibly powerful.
So I totally agree, totally on board with this, Julie. And it's super powerful, this know, like, and trust. And I think most of your conversations in sales, most of even your touch points with prospects and customers should be trying to push forward and ingrain one of those three at a time. But something that we've kind of like glossed over again, I just want to come back to, is expertise. So getting someone to know, like, and trust you enables you to have a conversation. It allows you to have an open conversation, to exchange information, to see then perhaps if business is going to be useful on both sides of the equation for the salesperson and the prospect. Now, I have a lot of conversations with people who, and I'll use the podcast as an example. There's a lot of people that approach me to come on the show. I do a bit of research on them. They've got books, they've got audiences, they've got all the right elements of a great podcast episode that's going to give the audience loads of value. But then I speak to them for 2 minutes and they're an idiot and they don't know anything about what they're supposed to be an expert in. And this is, you alluded to it before. So I don't get a chance to read everybody's books that comes on the show. There's just too much content. I physically couldn't manage it. But I try and read, or at least go through as much as I can. And as you said before, it's very easy, and it's easier forever for someone to self-publish a book, for it to look amazing. And if I've not physically got the time to run through it, it kind of adds that know, like, and trust to the conversation without any real evidence that there's an expertise there. So what I'm getting at is, for the audience, do they need to, clearly they need to be an expert. That's like undeniable. We're not even going to debate that. We're not going to discuss that. But do they need to proactively show that they're an expert as part of the whole personal branding exercise? Or is it okay for that just to come in naturally when someone speaks to you, that you can answer their questions?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that you can't assume people will figure out that you're an expert. So you want to be presenting yourself as one. But that doesn't mean you just say, I'm an expert in, right? Because anybody can say that they're an expert in and they may or may not be. So I think it's a combination, because I think that if you're not presenting yourself as the expert, then you're leaving a lot to chance. People may not figure out that you're the expert and know to come to you to have that conversation. But of course, when you're having that conversation, you absolutely need to be able to answer questions. And I think even more important than being able to answer questions is knowing the questions to ask. I think in sales, it's the most powerful thing that you can do is ask the right questions, because as you ask the right questions of somebody, you'll uncover information, and slowly that'll basically make the sale happen for you, because you'll get the information that you need. And just because you knew the right questions to ask, that shows that you know exactly what you're talking about. So I think it's a bit of both. I don't have a straight, like, this is what you need to do, because I think it's a combination.
Good stuff. And are there any other ways to proactively show that you're an expert? I mean, public speaking is clearly one because, if there's any Q&A at the end of a session, obviously that shows the amateurs from the pros from that perspective. But are there any other ways to engage with people? I don't know. I'm genuinely intrigued here, Julie. Are there any other ways that you know of to show that you're an expert without, being overbearing and kind of being that annoying man or woman who's constantly shouting their own praises? Are there any ways to demonstrate it without that kind of baggage on the side of it, if that makes sense?
One thing we haven't talked about, which I think is incredibly important, is who you associate with. And I think by virtue of associating with other experts, other leaders in their field, that lifts you up to a plane without you ever saying a word. Who you walk into a room with, that can make a big difference. It's something we could go into a lot of detail on. Is the people that you associate with play a huge role in your income, your health, and your happiness. And it also plays a huge role in how people perceive you. If you hang out with one shady person, in my book, I give an example of somebody in the real estate industry who I won't do business with. He's a super nice guy. He's always been incredibly supportive, but he is associated with somebody I 100% do not trust.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't like his practices. And so as a result, I will not do business with this guy, even though, he seems like a good guy. So who you associate with, who you're walking in a room with, who your friends are, that all can speak volumes. And so if you want to be seen as an expert, you want to surround yourself with other leaders and experts.
So I've got a practical example of this, and it, again, not blowing my own trumpet that I know what I'm doing at all. It's only through trial and error that this kind of process came to me. And I had someone question me over Facebook, one of the audience. I think his name's Nathan. So forgive me if I've got that wrong, because this was a couple of days ago. But I got quoted on Inc.com as one of the top business podcasts, or however you want to describe it. And there's a bunch of people. I was hitting way out of my league with the other shows that were on there. For example, Tim Ferriss's show was on there. So what I did very consciously was I went on LinkedIn and Twitter and I started promoting the article and tagging the big shots of the podcasting world that I was included with in this article. I was tagging them in it. And someone came on Facebook, as I said, I think his name is Nathan, and he was asking me, why am I promoting all these other shows along with my own? Why not just double down on my own? And that was literally, you just described it very eloquently there, better than what I ever have, or even just the process in my mind of how I go about it. But I very specifically tagged everyone else in it because it raises me up, even if just like a little notch towards the level in the minds of everyone else that sees that post. So it's very likely they're going to retweet it or share it because they've just got so much notifications hitting them all the time to pay attention to a little post from someone like me. But yeah, just putting me in the picture without there's no effort. It didn't really take much time. But you're kind of pre-framing that for me, in that example, that my podcast is on the level of theirs, if that makes sense. And
yeah, it's a perfect example.
And yeah, I as I said, I had to consciously do it. And as I said, it was explained to Nathan why, but that's just a little example of that. But that probably comes up more often than what we expect.
Yeah, and that's an excellent example. And also things like being featured or quoted in Inc. That's a big thing too. Forbes, a lot of these big name magazines and websites. That's not quite like your example was perfect of what I was saying, who you associate with, but these other people quoting you and saying you're an expert, that says it for you, right? You don't have to say you're an expert at what you're doing because they're saying it for you. And that's even better than you ever saying you're an expert or good at what you do.
Yeah. I mean, a hack for this, Brad Burton, I think his name is, he's a public speaker, motivational speaker from the UK. I listened to him on a podcast. And he's always quoted as the UK's leading motivational speaker, or something along those lines, as a specific phrase. And he's always quoted by it. And he's very good at what he does, for sure. And he could be, if you tested somehow the best motivational speakers in the UK, he's probably up there, if not at the top. He's in the top 10 for sure. He gets quoted as the UK's top motivational speaker all the time because, and this is him sharing the story on this other podcast, that he just said he was. He was pretty good. He put on his website that he said he was, and every time he gets a PR, every time someone writes him up, every time he goes on someone else's podcast and they go on his website to find a little bit of information about him, they just copy and paste from his website. So because of that, he's now become the UK's top motivational speaker, just through this simple hack of having confidence in himself to say it and then other people being too lazy to do their own research and they're just copying and pasting from his site. And obviously that spreads around. And then at that point, it becomes fact pretty much.
Yeah, as long as he's backing it up with his interviews and his quotes, and yeah, that's great.
Amazing stuff. Well, Julie, I've got a couple of questions for you that ask everyone that comes on the show. First one, what is a book or resource other than your own, which we'll come on to in a second, that you'd recommend to the Salesman podcast audience?
My favorite sales book is Pitch Anything by Oren Klaff. It's all about framing your pitch, and for me, it was a game changer when I read that book. I was lucky enough to get an early copy before it was even published, and yeah, it changed our approach, especially around raising money, but even in bringing in clients into our education and training company. So it's my favorite.
Definitely. We'll link to that in the show notes over at salesman.red. And final question that I ask everyone that comes on the show, other than that one time, which I totally forgot, and it's ruined the whole flow of 300 odd episodes that I've done now. But I'm going to ask you, Julie, that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give her to help her become better at selling?
Oh, well, I mean, it ties into what we've talked about, but I would start building my brand sooner. I would figure out, who I want to help and how I'm going to help them, and start incorporating that message into everything I did way sooner than I did. Because kind of like you, it was like trial and error, and I was like, this is working, and then I had to figure out what this was. And then once I figured it out, things got a lot easier. So the sooner I could do that, the sooner I would be making a lot more money and probably having a lot more fun. and
obviously that's a great answer. And there's a slightly deeper level question I want to ask from that. Is that because it compounds over time? So if you get your personal branding done, a few years earlier, 10 years down the line, it's way even bigger? Or is your personal brand on more of a linear scale? So just the earlier you get it done, kind of you get that benefits for those couple of years earlier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the sooner you're doing it, the better. And I mean, you can see this as an example. If you've ever posted a YouTube video, over time, the views, it can get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and more people see it. And then the more people who see it, the more other people who want to click on it, because now they're like, well, 20,000 people have looked at that video, I better go look at it. And I think that's kind of like a personal brand is the more, one person starts talking about you, and then now there's two, and then it's four, and it compounds from there. So the sooner you're doing it, and the sooner people are talking about you and sharing what you have to say and referring you, the sooner more people are doing it.
Definitely. Julie, tell us a little bit about the book. We've touched on it, but tell us about the book and then where we can find out more about you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, the best place to find me is at my website, havemoreinfluence.com, and connects to all my social media and emails, however you want to connect with me. That's the best place. The book, The New Brand You, I wrote really to help people build their brand, to make sales happen for you. Because again, I struggled with sales, and I found that with my brand, sales actually closed for me. I didn't have to always be closing, the ABCs of sales. They were happening for me. So I really outlined how I've done that in a way that's true to me, and to help other people create their brand and have sales happen for them in a way that's true to them, and just make the whole thing more fun and a lot easier.
Amazing stuff. And we can find that on Amazon, right?
Yeah, you bet. Lots of bookstores all over the world, but Amazon's probably the best place to grab it.
Perfect. Well, I'll link to it in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.red. And with that, Julie, I want to thank you again for your time. I want to thank you for your insights. I want to thank you for banging the personal brand drum, because I think it's something that I think everyone who knows that it's important in sales and business in general, everyone who knows it's important now but doesn't implement it, is going to be kicking themselves in 5-10 years time, when everything's more open, everything that you're doing is being shared, and whoever built a platform, as small as it might be, to just be the go-to expert in your industry as the sales professional, as a trusted advisor, whoever's built those platforms now, I think they're going to have the biggest market share in the future in the kind of worldwide, you can buy from anywhere in a click of a button kind of market. So I appreciate you banging the drum of personal branding. And with that, Julie, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been fantastic chatting with you.